Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Coalition for African Diaspora Student Athletes, or CADSA's very first episode of Alumni Career Talks. I'm your host for today, UC Davis track and field alum and project management team lead, Sochi Bryson. And at CADSA, our mission is to enrich the Black student athlete experience and connect them further with the Black community through unity, allyship, advocacy, and resources. Our show, Alumni Career Talks, hopes to get real-life perspectives from our professional community and give them a platform to discuss their journeys, professional and personal ventures, as well as give our student athletes advice for the future. Now, without further ado, CADSA welcomes you and welcomes our very first guest, Megan Mitchell.
Thank you so much for having me, Sochi. So my name is Megan Mitchell. I am a mom, I am a wife, I am a teacher, but most importantly, I consider myself a social justice advocate. I was a high school athlete, but not a college athlete. However, I did so many things in college that I feel like I was balancing the schedule of what could be considered the same as balancing the schedule of an athlete. So I'm super excited to be here, and I thank CATSA for inviting me.
Yeah, no, CADSA is so stoked to have you on. And so let's just hop right into it. So, with this being Alumni Career Talks, we want to first start off with talking about your career. Did you always know that you wanted to be an educator? How did you kind of decide that this was what you wanted to pursue?
So this is an interesting story. My mom is actually a retired teacher. So growing up, I absolutely knew that I wanted to do anything but be a teacher. I definitely did not think education was in my wheelhouse. I never envisioned myself being a teacher. I never envisioned myself loving teaching or feeling like it was my passion. So I went to Cal State Long Beach for undergrad, and I was a double major in political science and Africana studies. And my plan was to be a lawyer. So I did political science because that was basically like the pre-law of Cal State Long Beach. I took the LSAT. I went and applied to Howard's Law School. I had my mother pay thousands of dollars for test masters. I got into Howard's Law School. I was psyched to go to Howard's Law School because my best friend was a Howard undergrad. She went to Howard for undergrad. And another friend of mine went to Howard for undergrad. So we were always at homecoming. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want the HBCU experience. And then a week before graduating from college, I confessed to my mom that I actually did not want to be a lawyer. And I knew that pretty early on in my undergrad career, but I was just always was one of those people that if I said it, I did it. And so I always said that I wanted to be a lawyer. I never envisioned myself doing anything but being a lawyer. I said I wanted to be a lawyer, Janet Jackson, and a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. So thus far, I am 0 for 3. And so my mom like encouraged me, like, maybe you should think about education. I was like, no, girl, that's not it. So I actually, after graduation, I became the project manager of an entertainment firm, Releve Entertainment. And I worked there for a couple of years, was on tour when I caught pneumonia.
Oh.
And because I was on tour and I was 22 or 23, I did not want to leave tour. So my pneumonia ended up getting worse, and I was actually sent home and put on bed rest.
Oh, no.
And yeah, I was on bed rest for like a month. And so as I started gaining energy back, I was getting stir crazy being in the house. And so my mom was like, why don't you volunteer in my classroom? And I started volunteering and was like terrible. Like I was getting into it with the kids. I was like, I'm not coming back. These kids are stressing me out. And then I would come back the next day. And then as I started getting better, I started changing my work meetings around like the things that the kids were doing in the classroom. Then I started changing my travel schedule. About like 8 months after that, the principal was like, hey, why don't you think about doing this part time? And I was like, okay, I'll try and figure it out. So then I was working for my real job, like my full-time job, like kind of remotely. And mind you, this is like 2010, 2011. So remote working was like not really a thing, but because it was entertainment, I kind of like got away with it. And then I was working at the school for like 3 days a week. Then I started saying, okay, well, I will go into the office these days, then I'll work remotely these days, and then I can only travel Friday through Monday. And then Friday through Monday became like Friday night to like Sunday night.
Right.
And then after a year or so of doing that, I decided that clearly God was trying to tell me I should go into education. And I had never felt so fulfilled doing anything else than when I was in the classroom.
Right.
So I went back to school. I got my teaching credential, waited a couple of years and got my master's in education. And I've been in the classroom ever since. But ironically, parents, right? My mom knew all along I was going to be a teacher because my very first job, all my friends were working at Knott's Berry Farm. I worked at a daycare. And then in college, after I finished my internship with like BET and I was on the program board, I got a part time job at an after school program. And then when I graduated, before I took the job at Releve, when I was kind of in limbo, I took the full time job at the after school program as a site coordinator. So, like, I look back and I'm like, all of my jobs that I've had all surrounded kids. So why I thought I could escape being a teacher, I do not know.
It was staring at you right in the face.
It was staring at me right in the face, and I was like running from it. Like they
Yeah.
say, like running out of church like a hooker. Like I was running away from teaching, like that. Like I still sometimes I'm in my classroom and I'm like, girl, I can't believe we're doing this. But you know, I love it. It is like my life's calling. It is my life's passion. There is nothing that makes me feel more myself than being in my classroom with my students.
Yeah, absolutely. That I will say is the most interesting story I've ever heard of how someone got into their career.
I know,
But
because
it's amazing.
mostly teachers, like, I wish I was one of those teachers that was like, I always knew from an early age. Like, girl, no. I was like, I see what this lady has to do. I don't want to do it. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, I pray my children don't become teachers because while I love it, it's one of those things that I'm like, you know, the stress of teaching, the low pay wages of
Yeah.
teaching, the lo- the loss of autonomy that we're seeing as educators,
Mhm.
um, which in any other career, right? You trust the professional, but in education, like that's like the last thing, the last people they trust are the teachers. Um, I wish I didn't love it as much because if I didn't love it as much, I would be working and making a lot more money than I am. But like I know that there's nothing that I would enjoy more than I do being in the classroom with
Yeah.
27 sixth graders.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting that you thought you were going to be a lawyer and you did all of these, poli sci, pre-law, prereqs. And obviously that stuff doesn't leave you. And you mentioned that you're, really passionate about social justice. And so I wanted to kind of talk about how that bleeds into your classroom or into your life as an educator.
So I feel like anybody who has been a poli sci major knows that when you get to your capstone or your upper division courses, you are doing a lot of reading policies, like a ton of reading policies. And so I feel like having to do that for junior and senior year of college prepared me to be able to look at education policy and WASP documents and read different policy measures and laws and really get the deeper understanding, which
Mhm.
kind of makes it come full circle because, you know, for a long time I was like, dang, I wasted so many years doing other things. I just wish I would have known I wanted to be a teacher because I could have just done that straight. Like, I'm not
Mhm.
somebody that likes to do things the hard way.
Right.
But now I look back and I'm like, okay, I see why I needed to be in poli sci, because I needed to understand how to read policy and have the stamina to read through hundreds of pages of documents and being able to analyze data, qualitative and quantitative data. And
Mhm.
so utilizing that helps empower me, because I feel like one of the other struggles that sometimes teachers have is that we're so focused on the subject matter that we teach that we don't necessarily always have the time to dedicate to reading like our contracts or the policies that are being passed by the school board.
Mhm.
And it really wasn't until 2020 that I really saw those poli sci skills coming out, and started really being able to utilize that and inform myself when I'm going to school board meetings and fighting on behalf of students of color, but specifically marginalized students, which is going to be like Black students, especially in the area where I teach, in the area where I live, because we are a micro marginalized group. And
Mhm.
so using that skill set, and also using my background as an educator, I feel like further empowers me to keep speaking up and continue being a social justice advocate. So at the end of the day, it's like, regardless of the path that you take, I feel like there's always a reason why you endure certain things, or
Mhm.
you get involved in certain things, because you will use those skills tenfold.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting that you mentioned micro marginalized groups. I myself went to a school or school district that I was considered, a part of a micro marginalized group. My school was
Yeah.
like 60% Asian American. I think I was one of maybe five Black identifying students at my entire high
Mhm.
school. And I feel like I didn't really have educators in my life at that point who really advocated for, myself or like students who were like me. And so I'm curious about how you inspire, how you nurture, kind of, welcome all this, that really small population of micro marginalized students.
So, I feel like everybody went through like a period of reflection while we were all quarantined at home.
Right.
And one of the things that I really started doing, especially after the murder of George Floyd, was deciding that I was going to show up in all places as my authentic self.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is there was a lot of pressure. I'm 36. And so I grew up where I was not the first college graduate in my family. I wasn't, like going to be the hero of my family. Like, I come from a like, I'm proud of the accomplishments of my family members, the generations that
Mhm.
came before me.
Right.
But one of the things that I was also taught and that was ingrained inside of me was assimilation. And being white facing in places that weren't designed for Black spaces.
Mhm.
And so, like, my mom was very intentional about naming me Megan Ashley, right? Like, Megan was one of the top five names in 1985 when I was born. And there was many a times when I walked into rooms or walked into interviews and they were looking for Megan Ashley, and this Black face popped up and they were like, oh, not what we expected, right?
Right.
Um, And so I realized that I I don't necessarily want to say pandered, but that I played into the idea of code switching,
Mhm.
right? Like, when I'm with my Black friends, when I'm with my Black family, when I'm with Black educators, like, I can be myself. But when I'm with my other colleagues, I have to talk a certain way, and I need to dress a certain way, and I need to present a certain way. And I'm only going to wear braids in the summer. And I'm going to make sure that if I am wearing my natural hair, that it's going to be what my Ghana would say was kempt. Like it looked like I, you know, had, if I was refusing to straighten my hair, then at least it needed to look presentable. So that way
Mhm.
I could be accepted into spaces that were, dominated by, not just white people, dominated by people that weren't Black.
Right.
And after the murder of George Floyd, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, I was able to graduate as summa cum laude of UCLA for my Master's of Education program. And
Mm.
when I did that, I was wearing my gold chains and my gold earrings and my J1s and my braids because I was pregnant. And I still was respected and I still, was who I am, but not changing myself. And so, what I have done and really committed to do, especially the last 2 years, being inside of the classroom, was presenting as such. Like, if I want to wear a shirt that says BLM on it or arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor with my matching Jordan 13s that are rose gold and my braids, and I have countless ear piercings, and I love wearing my 3 or 4 or 5 gold chains, I'm going to do that. And guess
Right.
what? When I do that, I'm also going to be educating you, and I'm also going to be doing this, providing you with a quality and a rigorous form of instruction. And I'm going to do all of that without changing who I am. And
Right.
so for my students, I look like, for my, the small number of students, the past 2 years, I've had at least 3 Black girls in my class. And so I look like their moms and their
Yeah.
aunties and their grandmother and
Yeah.
the other women that they look up to. And I'm in a place of respect where people want to be in my class. So I'm not just looking like their moms and their aunties. They're seeing other kids of different cultures look up to me. They're seeing my coworkers respect me. They're seeing me in leadership positions at the school looking like them without having to change.
Right.
And so I can say to my students, like, oh, y'all are tripping today. And the girls laugh because they've heard that before. And then my students also know what it's like to have a Black teacher.
Right.
And, there's all this data that's surrounded about, I don't want to like misquote it, but basically, like, if a student has at least one Black teacher in their K through 12 experience, like their percentage of going into higher education or pursuing higher education is like insurmountable. And specifically, if they have that Black teacher between kindergarten and 6th grade, it's like
Mhm.
a 95% chance, right? So I'm currently a 6th grade teacher. And even having the discussions with my principal, who is, he is a white male, which is what most principals look like, but he is very conscious about his privilege and the
Mm.
space that he occupies, and provides room for myself as a micro minority. I hate the word minority, but a micro minority or a marginalized group on staff,
Yeah.
because there's only 2 of us, and then we're both Black women, and one's
Mhm.
in kindergarten and I'm in 6th grade. So you got
Yeah.
two chances to have us. And when I presented him with this data, he was like, all right, I get it. I'm going to make sure that I look, and if kids didn't have this teacher, then I'm going to do my best to make sure that Black students have you, because in our district, there's not a lot of opportunities to have Black teachers.
Right.
Um, I'm trying to think, in my schooling, one of the Black teachers at my elementary school was my mom, so I couldn't have her. My first grade teacher was a Black woman. And then I went to a high school, well, Whitney High School. So that was 7th through 12th grade. And in 7th through 12th grade, I had one Black teacher, which was my Black English teacher, Mama Logan.
Yeah.
And even for her, like, she is of that boomer generation, same with my mom. And so she was very much so about helping us navigate that space.
Yeah.
But what I want my students to do is be their true, authentic self in all spaces and demand to be accepted. No longer ask for permission for a seat at a table. You pull up your chair, you pull up your chair with your crown on your head and your head held high and know that you belong in these spaces. And don't
Yeah.
let anybody tell you otherwise. And don't think that you have to change something about yourself. Like, obviously, we need to carry ourselves and conduct ourselves in a professional manner, but a professional manner does not mean assimilate to whiteness. A professional manner means that you speak a certain way, that you speak the language and have the domain specific vocabulary and understanding of whatever space you're occupying, but you do not change who you are fundamentally to make other people comfortable.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. You're just
I'm
really
sorry, that
creating.
was so long.
Oh my gosh, no, that was such a wonderful answer. You're just, really exemplifying how beautiful it is to create this community at school at such a young age. I can't really remember having teachers who looked like me in elementary school. In college, even in college, I had, I think, one Black professor. And so it's just wonderful that you're kind of fostering this sense of pride in yourself, pride in your community at such a young age.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, in college, like that's why I started taking Black Studies classes, and I was literally taking Black Studies classes so that I could survive taking my political science classes, because I do not remember having a single prof in any political science class that was Black, and
Yeah.
most of them were men, right?
Right.
But when I got into the Black Studies classes, it was men and women, and they looked like me. And the majority of the students in those classes looked like me. So
Yeah.
I didn't have to code switch, and I didn't have to identify or feel like I had to keep up, or
Mhm.
not just keep up, that I had to be 110% to prove that I need to be there with somebody 70%. And
Right.
so what I want to do now is I want my students to feel very comfortable in my class. So I'm not about making anybody else feel uncomfortable, but what I am about is making sure that students that look like me feel comfortable and know that they deserve to be in these spaces.
Right. That's lovely. So this kind of leads into my next question for you, which is
Okay.
actually our last question, but it's just kind of, overall, what message or advice would you give to the next generation of Black educators? I know it's a big question,
Ooh.
definitely a big question, but I'm curious, on your take on, what this next generation of Black educators, need to think about, what they need to look out for, especially with, you talked about being one of two Black educators at an entire school, and that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
So I'm just,
The first thing I would say is that we're needed.
you're right.
We are needed. If you look at the majority of students, compared to the majority of teachers, like, those numbers are definitely disproportionate.
Right.
And so it is imperative for students to see Black faces in classrooms. It's imperative for students to see Black faces as administrators, because if not, how else are students going to learn that they belong in the education system, right? Our United States education system, like a lot of things in our country, um, does not make room for Blackness many times. They keep talking about the achievement gap, which I hate saying. It's not an achievement gap, because it's not about a lack of, or a lack of desire of achievement. It's because that's the way the system's created, right? Like, the fact that so much is centered around, I feel like what has become the new racism is socioeconomic disenfranchisement.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't realize the effects that you're having on kids till you can't get any of the Black kids out of your classroom, right? Even students you don't have. So that would be one, is like, we need Black educators. Two would be, like everything else in life, we have to be excellent. So one of the things that I always recommend to young teachers, but that I can say of my other friends that are also Black educators, is that we know our subject matter, we know our standards, we know what is required of us, and we know that, so that way we can modify the curriculum as needed. And we can provide supplemental curriculum that's going to be more representative of our students and more inclusive, not just of Black students, but of all cultures, right? And so me knowing my standards means that nobody can come to me and tell me that I'm not teaching what I'm supposed to teach, because I can
Absolutely.
tell you the 2 or 3 standards that this aligns to, and I can tell you what my student learning objective is, and I can tell you what the end goal is. And
Right.
so understand that, like everything in life, the odds are usually against us, but if you are excellent in everything that you do and adopt this mentality, not that it's the talented 10th, right? Like there's got to be more than 10% of us. There's the talented 100, all of us. If we do everything in excellence, then you are going to be more powerful than you even recognize. And 2 is understand that we are agents of change,
Mm,
and that in spite of what the media may be telling us, in spite of what school boards may be telling us, in spite of what it may seem, is that the work that we're doing is changing lives, and we are creating a generation of future world changers.
yeah.
And so as we continue to stay steady on the course, um, and work and endeavor to make things better for ourselves, right? Because there is a bit of advocacy when it comes to being involved. Like I'm heavily involved in our union, and I don't always agree with the things that our union does, and I'm very vocal about that because they need to be more they need to be more inclusive of Black educators and understand
Mhm.
that the same issues that our Black students are facing, Black educators are facing as well. So be an advocate for yourself, be an advocate for your student, and don't let administrators or what can seem like obstacles deter you. Find another way around,
Right.
right? Like if anything, we are people of the diaspora are survivors. We are innovators. We are culture changers. And so all of that is flowing through our DNA. And
Yeah.
it makes it no different what type of position you're in, whether you're teaching a TK classroom or whether you're a distinguished faculty in residence at a university,
Yeah.
right? Like our voice is needed, our voice matters. And so stay faithful to the course. And I have to remind myself about that daily because, girl, I was ready to jump shit last year. Like, I was like, let me go into ed tech, let me make a lot of money, let me
Right.
bounce.
Right.
But, maybe my calling is not to stay in the classroom forever. Maybe it is one day to get into ed tech or become a writer for some of these publishing houses that publish our textbooks. But right now, I see every day why I'm needed in the classroom.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, Black educators, I think we're made to feel minimized, and we deal
Mhm.
with a lot of microaggressions at work. We deal
Right.
with coworkers that say disparaging things about Black students, and then you're looking at them like, well, if you feel like this, what do you think
Right.
about me?
Right.
Right. But be vocal, call things out, and call things out in a way that's not combative, but call things out in a way that will dramatize the need for change,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Like as long as people are complicit and content, things won't change. Discontent is what causes change. And sometimes you may have to hold your tongue in the teacher's lounge, but you can find a way to, make sure that maybe you have cultural responsive training for the entire staff. And
Right.
that's how you address these microaggressions that you're going through.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. You're such an excellent guest on our first episode of Alumni Career Talks, and CADSA really thanks you, and we really appreciate your time and support. You've given our community such powerful insight on what it means to be an educator, what it means to be a Black educator, and a leader for young Black students. And thanks to all of our viewers who continue to support the Coalition for African Diaspora Student Athletes, or CADSA. Stay tuned for our next episode. We look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much.